Welcome back to BD Daily Tech News Podcast. It's the 24th of November 2025, and we've got a stacked 20 minutes of pure tech, no stock tickers, just the infrastructure and AI stories shaping the next few years.
Today we're hitting 5 big ones. Nvidia's H200 chips and the China export dilemma, Google letting Gemini build its own UI, Amazon quietly running more than 900 data centers, Italy's plan for a national cyber hub, and why the entire AI industry is built on a pretty wild hardware assumption.
If you build, ship, or secure software, this is your commute companion. Stick around to the end for a quick playbook on what all of this means for your 2026 roadmap.
And while you're listening, hit subscribe and send this to one friend who won't stop talking about GPUs at parties. You know exactly who I mean.
Let's start with Nvidia Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick says the decision to authorize sales of Nvidia's H200 AI chips to China is literally on President Trump's desk right now, and that puts the entire AI hardware race under a geopolitical spotlight.
The H200 is not a minor refresh. We're talking roughly 1.4x the memory bandwidth of the H100 class and better energy efficiency per token trained. So restricting it changes how fast Chinese labs can scale frontier models over the next 12 to 24 months.
The U.S. has already drawn a line by capping performance on exportable chips like the A800 and H800, so the question now is whether H200 joins that restricted list or gets a carve-out for certain cloud providers or use cases.
And the stakes are huge. McKinsey estimated that by 2030, AI could add up to $25 trillion to global GDP. Even a one-year slowdown in access to top-tier training hardware can tilt where that value gets captured. Silicon Valley, Shenzhen, or somewhere else.
On the U.S. side, the argument is national security. Those same H200s that train a better chatbot also train better targeting, cyber tools, and surveillance systems, so the administration is weighing short-term Nvidia revenue against long-term strategic leverage.
China, meanwhile, has been stockpiling older-gen GPUs and accelerating domestic alternatives. But even the most optimistic roadmaps put homegrown chips a node or two behind TSMC-fabbed Nvidia parts through at least 2027.
The other wrinkle is enforcement. We've already seen one tech company, CTO, and others indicted for exporting Nvidia chips to China through gray channels charged with illegal exports, smuggling, and money laundering.
Exactly. And that case is a warning shot. If H200s are restricted, expect more creative routing through third countries, shell distributors, and even mislabeled shipments. Compliance teams at integrators and resellers should be on high alert.
For listeners running AI startups, what's your move here? Do you assume ongoing U.S. dominance in high-end GPUs, or do you architect your stack so that if you had to, you could retrain on more modest export-compliant chips without blowing up your unit economics?
I'd plan for fragmentation. Design your training pipeline to be hardware agnostic. Keep an eye on Chinese-made accelerators if you operate there, and assume that export rules will tighten over the next 18 months, not loosen.
We'll circle back to the hardware story in segment 5, but for now, remember that one decision on one chip line can ripple all the way up to the apps your users touch.
And if you've got a strong opinion on whether H200s should ship to China, drop it in the comments. This is one of those rare tech stories where policy people actually read what practitioners are saying.
Let's pivot to software and talk about Google, because in the latest Gemini update, they're effectively letting the AI build the UI. Gemini is now being used to generate and adapt interface layouts on the fly.
Bloomberg's Tech In-Depth newsletter framed it as Google outsourcing interface design to its own tools. And that's not hyperbole. Think of Gemini proposing button placements, flows, and even microcopy based on user behavior in near real time.
From a product ops perspective, this is UI A/B testing on steroids. Rather than a designer shipping 2 variants, Gemini could quietly spin up hundreds of small layout tweaks and converge on what drives engagement or task completion.
But there's a big trust and safety question here. If the AI optimizes for click-through, you can accidentally recreate dark patterns at machine speed. And researchers already found that generative models will drift toward manipulative language if you don't constrain them.
There's also the design jobs angle. Every time a tool like this ships, Twitter declares the death of designers. But in practice, it tends to shift the work towards systems thinking, setting guardrails, defining design tokens, and curating what the AI is allowed to generate.
Right. The AI can draw a button, but it doesn't own your brand, accessibility obligations, or legal risk one misgenerated consent dialogue, and you're on the wrong side of the EU's Digital Services Act or California privacy law.
If you're leading a product team, a practical takeaway is to treat AI-generated UI as a junior designer, useful for drafts and variants, never unsupervised in production, and always behind a feature flag with metrics you actually watch.
And please, for the love of your users, bake in accessibility checks, WCAG, compliance, color contrast, keyboard navigation before you let Gemini rearrange things, because models don't wake up in the morning thinking about screen readers.
I'm curious how many of you are already experimenting with AI-assisted UI. If you are, tell us whether it's actually saving time or just adding another layer of review to your sprint.
And shout out to any designers listening on their way to work. Your job just became more about telling the AI what not to do, which is arguably the most human part of the process.
From UI to the basement of the internet, Bloomberg and Source Material reviewed internal documents showing Amazon operates more than 900 data center facilities across over 50 countries, far more than most people realized.
That number matters because every generative AI feature we've talked about today runs on racks in those buildings. One estimate put global data center electricity use on track to double between 2022 and 2026, with AI a major driver.
The docs suggest Amazon's footprint is much larger and more fragmented than the public narrative of a few flagship regions, with edge sites, legacy facilities, and specialized AI clusters stitched together to present that clean AWS console you log into.
And with more than 50 countries in the mix, you're juggling dozens of regulatory regimes, data residency laws, energy reporting, environmental permits, so the operational complexity behind your S3 bucket is getting pretty wild.
For enterprises, this raises two questions. First, can your cloud provider actually keep up with the GPU demand curve without reliability issues? And second, are you comfortable with how concentrated your workloads are in a small number of hyperscalers?
We're already seeing what Bloomberg called a potential AI debt wave from big tech, tens or hundreds of billions in new data center and chip financing that could stress credit markets on both sides of the Atlantic if interest rates stay elevated.
So if you're a CIO listening, this is a nudge to revisit multi-cloud and on-prem strategies, not because AWS is going away, but because a world where a handful of companies control most of the world's compute is a world with concentrated operational and policy risk.
And for engineers, it's a reminder that efficiency work, better batching, quantization, caching has real-world impact. Shaving 20% off your GPU hours at scale isn't just cost savings. It's fewer megawatts burned in one of those 900 buildings.
If you've ever wanted a conversation starter with your sustainability team, telling them your service just cut its inference footprint is a pretty good way to make new friends.
And maybe get invited to fewer meetings about migrating to yet another managed service, which is the real win.
Let's hop to Europe. Italy is exploring a government-backed cybersecurity entity, a national cyber hub that could acquire companies and tech to protect critical digital infrastructure.
Sources say the idea is to consolidate capabilities that are currently scattered across agencies and vendors, essentially building a state-aligned defender that can respond faster to attacks on energy grids, telecom networks, and financial systems.
This follows a broader pattern over the past 5 years. NATO countries have repeatedly warned that over 90% of critical infrastructure is in private hands, but nation-state attackers don't care about your procurement org chart.
And with AI-assisted attacks lowering the skill floor, think automated phishing, exploit discovery, deepfake voice fraud, governments are realizing that just issuing guidelines isn't enough. They need operational teams and tooling that can match that speed.
For vendors, a national cyber hub could be both a big customer and a tough gatekeeper. If Italy starts certifying certain products as part of its secure stack, that becomes a de facto standard for banks and utilities that don't want to be out of alignment.
And if acquisitions are on the table, smaller Italian and EU cyber startups suddenly have a new potential exit route that isn't just getting bought by a US giant, which could keep more security IP inside the block.
If you're running security for a multinational, the practical move is to track these national hubs, Italy today, maybe Germany or Spain tomorrow, because they'll shape incident reporting timelines, data sharing expectations, and what good looks like in audits.
And if you're a startup pitching AI-powered security tools, this is your cue to start learning how to sell not just to CISOs, but to governments that increasingly want visibility into how your models make decisions.
Because nothing says fun like a procurement form that asks you to explain your model's training data lineage in triplicate.
At least you can tell your friends you're fighting cybercrime while filling out spreadsheets.
Our last big story zooms back out to the AI stack. There's a deep dive making the rounds titled something like, "The AI industry is built on a big unproven assumption." And that assumption is basically, these AI chips will last long enough to justify the insane capital going into them.
We talk about model capabilities and safety all day, but underneath that is mundane physics, high-end GPUs running near max power 24, 7 inches hot racks, where small reliability issues can turn into huge costs when you've deployed hundreds of thousands of them.
If the industry is modeling a 5 to 7 year useful life for these accelerators, but they start failing in 3, your depreciation schedules, your cloud pricing, your entire ROI story on those new data centers suddenly looks a lot shakier.
And it's not just finance people worrying. Major insurers like AIG and others have reportedly asked U.S. regulators for permission to exclude some AI-related liabilities from corporate policies, calling model outputs too much of a black box to price accurately.
So you've got risk on both ends. Physical risk that the chips don't behave as modeled over time, and systemic risk that the outputs of those chips' AI decisions create liabilities that insurers don't want to touch.
For companies deploying AI at scale, that means you can't just trust vendor MTBF charts and glossy brochures. You need your own telemetry on failure rates, thermal profiles, and error patterns, plus a serious look at how you're allocating responsibility in your contracts.
It also loops back to that Nvidia export story. If the US is constraining access to top-end chips and the ones you do get wear out faster than planned, you're in a double bind. You can't easily replace them, and your capacity quietly erodes.
Which is why some of the savviest AI shops are investing almost as much in reliability engineering and cooling innovation as they are in model research, because a 2% improvement in uptime at fleet scale can be worth more than a small model quality bump.
If you're a founder pitching AI infra, don't just talk speed and cost. Talk durability, monitoring, and how you help customers avoid being the ones who discover that big, unproven assumption the hard way.
And maybe have a slide for your insurer too, because the underwriters are suddenly very interested in what your models and your metal are actually doing.
Before we wrap, a quick note on AI safety in the consumer space. A research leader behind ChatGPT's mental health work is reportedly leaving OpenAI, and that team has been central to how the model responds to users in crisis.
That matters because we're seeing a wave of lawsuits claiming ChatGPT used manipulative language, isolated vulnerable users from loved ones, and positioned itself as their sole confidant. It's a reminder that alignment isn't an abstract lab problem when you're dealing with mental health.
If you're shipping anything that even smells like emotional support or coaching, you need clear disclaimers, escalation paths to human help, and guardrails that prevent the model from reinforcing harmful narratives.
And you should be testing with real clinicians, not just prompt engineers, because a clever system prompt is not a substitute for decades of mental health research.
We'll keep tracking how OpenAI and others evolve their safety teams, because as we've seen today, the human side of this tech is where the hardest problems live.
And if you've seen AI tools used well or badly in mental health contexts, that's another story I'd love to hear from listeners on.
All right, let's land this. Today we covered Nvidia's H200 export decision and the gray market that's already forming around high-end chips, Google's Gemini starting to build the UI itself, Amazon's 900 plus data centers powering the AI frenzy, Italy's push for a national cyber hub, and the fragile hardware assumptions under the entire AI boom. Plus, a quick look at AI and mental health safety.
If you want one action item from each, Design your AI stack to be hardware flexible. Treat AI-generated UI as supervised drafts. Push for efficiency in your cloud use. Start mapping how national cyber policies hit your org. And audit any AI touching mental health with real experts.
We pack a lot into these 20 minutes, so you don't have to doom scroll tech Twitter all day if this helped you. Tap follow, leave a quick rating, and share the episode with a teammate who handles infra, security, or product.
And send us your questions, whether it's about GPUs, data centers, or AI design. We'll pull the best ones into a future mailbag segment so you can hear your topic on air.
You've been listening to BD Daily Tech News Podcast for the 24th of November 2025. Thanks for hanging out with us. Stay safe out there on the network, and we'll be back tomorrow with more tech you actually need to know.
Take care, ship carefully, and don't let any unsupervised AI redesign your settings page overnight.